Hello, I am Jerry Page. I am in Savannah, Missouri. I am with Richard Davis. Richard, thank you again so much for allowing me to interview you. Go ahead and introduce yourself and start with when and where you were born.
So I'm Richard Davis. Was born in Lexington, Kentucky. I think at the University of Lexington. Uh, November 15th, 1960. Interestingly enough, my birth certificate says 11:15 in the morning. My brother's date and time also match, but that was when they did C-sections. So we think our doctor had a sense of humor. But I'm the youngest of the family by 7 years. So I later found out I was the accident child. So that was kind of funny. To me, I mean, I knew it, but my mom lived with me at the end of her life and we were talking about it one day. So I thought it was kind of cute. I said, "Oh, didn't plan on me, did you?" And she goes, "No." I said, "Thought I'd save the marriage, didn't you?" And she goes, "Yes." I said, "Bet you wanted a girl too." "Yes." I said, "Yeah, kind of, maybe. I don't know." Yeah, now I'll be 65 in November. So that's interesting. I never thought I'd get past 30s back when I was a youngin, but here I am. We left Kentucky. I think I was 3 or 4, and that the whole family drama. My dad was a crazy maker and owed people money, so they just loaded up the car and drove west until they got to Tulsa, and my mom went, "Oh, Tulsa's pretty. Let's stay here." So I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and then lived a little bit in LA. I've worked in Tucson, Phoenix, anywhere else? Well, and I live in Lawrence now, and Santa Fe. Worked in Santa Fe also for a couple of months. And I don't know. That's about it. I mean, I identify as gay. I used to not really want to do that, but as I grew older politically, it became important that people knew that there were other people, especially, in places like Oklahoma and Kansas and Missouri and all the small towns everywhere. Big argument for pride parades. It's like, not for me. It's so people know there's other people who are like them, so they don't, aren't depressed and feel like they're alone in the world. I don't know where to go from there. So, like I said, grew up in Tulsa. I knew at an early age I was gay. It was horrible because I was in a Southern Baptist family. So the oppression of gay people in that church is pretty well documented. So it bothered me to the point where I like many gay people thought about ending it all and failed. And then realized afterward that there was too many good things to let other people's opinion of me get me down. So moved on from that. And when I talk to younger people, I always say, listen, if you're feeling bad about yourself or you're feeling bad about the way society treats you, the thing you have that we didn't have is mental health, and it's available and it's easy to find, and the stigma is still there, but you got to do it for yourself, because otherwise you waste so much of your energy and things you could be doing positively for yourself on trying, to build this thing around you that will please other people. So that was kind of bad, and I try not to dwell on too much negative things about being a gay person, because a lot of it, even though, society imposes a lot of weird pressure on you, it's what you do with that that makes a difference. And so when I kind of look back on my life, I kind of think, wow, I did that to myself, kind of, because I knew who I was. I knew I was a good person, and I let other people's opinions, really mess with me. And that's an age thing. I think the older you get, I was the oldest person in my friend group. So occasionally people will get to a milestone age and go, okay, what's 40 like, or what's 50 like? It's like, I said, I feel like I did when I was a teenager and in my 20s. I still think life is fun, and I want to do things and have adventures. And I said, the advantage of getting older is you start realizing that there's a lot of baggage you carry around that you don't have to carry. And so that's kind of nice to just start letting all of that peel off, and you feel lighter as you get older. And as my friends tell me, I can be a, what's the term, Karen. And one of my coworkers goes, "Wow, you really can be a Karen." I said, "Yeah, but I only do it to Karens." I said, God help you if you're being mean to some waitress or a cashier, because I will not hold my tongue. I will just tear into you and tell you all about yourself. Because I think people who do that to other people have low self-esteem anyway, so it's a good way to kibosh it. Just turn it back on them. I look back on my youth, and yeah, the parts that I let be bad were bad, but I had a really good childhood. We weren't rich. Like I said earlier, my mom came to live with me 2000, I think. I called her on the phone. She had been having some issues, and I said, "Why don't you just retire and come live with me?" Which I think is many gay sons' duty. I mean, it's like the oldest daughter in some traditions. They have to care for the parents and all that. And I think gay people tend to take on caring for their mothers and their fathers if they have that kind of relationship. And it was interesting. We never had the parental dynamic that my brothers had. I don't know why that is, but we really never had it. I mean, I was an asshole. I was very stubborn about my opinions and about what I was going to do with myself. And so I apologized to that when she moved in with me. I said, I don't know how you survived my teenage years and early 20s, because I was a jerk. It's like, when are you going to be home? When I get home. But she was actually sweet about it. She said, I worried about all my kids. She said, but I didn't worry about you because I don't know. She said, I didn't worry that you were going to get into situations that you couldn't get out of because you're kind of smart about that stuff. And I said, yeah. I said, I learned from my brothers, be bad, don't get caught. So, you got to be a little clever. And I actually told my nephew that one year. I said, listen, you're a big, tall guy and you're kind of intimidating, but people carry guns and whatnot now. I said, just why antagonize people? Why even go there? If you don't like somebody, then don't be around them. It's as easy as that's easy. That makes life easy. Tulsa had a really, from what I understand now, talking to other people, had a really good gay nightlife, which was amazing. And I remember realizing that a bar was a gay bar downtown once. Never got the nerve to go in there, but I was also way too young, which didn't stop me later. But our high school friends figured out that we were going out drinking, and they said, "Where are you going out to drink?" And I said, "Well, gay bars." And they were like, "What?" I said, "Yeah, gay bars." And he goes, "Why?" And I said, "Because they let us in and they let us buy drinks." And he goes, "Why would they do that?" I said, "They need chicken. I don't know." I said, "They want young people." And they said, "Well," and so we actually let some of our most of my friends weren't gay anyway, but they went with us. And the ones that were a little paranoid about it, I said, "Listen, you're going to get hit on because it's flattery. You look attractive, take it that way. And you can say, no, I'm with this person or that person. And they're fine about that." I said, "You'll probably get free drinks that way because, we're that way." It's like, okay, great. Here, have a drink. I'm sorry I bothered you. So yeah, I had a pretty good youth. I marvel at my mother. She raised 3 kids with not much help from my dad. I don't think he ever really gave money to. Well, I know he didn't pay child support. So yeah, it was to me. I look back on it now because I've always, ever since I started working, made more money than my mom, and I struggled paying bills. And I just think, how did you do that? How did you raise 3 kids and feed us? And we always had presents and we never did without. And then I don't understand how she pulled it off. And she dropped out of, I think she went to 8th grade. And then her and her brother went to an orphanage when their mother died until her dad remarried. So her life is just astounding. Never learned to drive. Just the things that she managed with what little she had was pretty amazing to me. So yeah. My dad was a whole other character. He's, and with age and time, I kind of realized he probably had undiagnosed mental issues, but you know, nothing you can do about that. But it helps me kind of get him out of. Like I told somebody, I said, hating your parents is kind of stupid. They're people. They're going to make mistakes. Look at them as people. If you can't appreciate them as parents, just realize they were people, and they had parents who probably didn't do a great job either. And there's no instructions. You just kind of get what you get, and you try to do your best. And I said, if you think your parents did their best, and I said, my mom made up for my dad easily, and I said, you just gotta let it go. He died. I don't know how old I was. 30. It's my 30s, I think, when he passed. He was a smoker. He got cancer, and he probably could have stopped the cancer, but he was always thinking about how to get money. So he had this scheme to go make more money somewhere, and then my brother finally went and rescued him, which I told him was a bad idea. I had kind of disassociated with my dad before this all happened, because I just told him, I said, he's a crazy maker, and I don't want to be around him. So it was interesting. I told my brother he shouldn't do it, and it really almost cost him his marriage. My dad couldn't speak, and they took his wife's craft area, made a bedroom for him, and she took care of him. My brother didn't, so she was kind of intermediary. And I had learned through the years that he would drop names. He had 3 other kids in the same town, with a woman who was 4 years older than my older brother. Very nice. And he didn't ask for an official divorce until I was like 21, which obviously was a money thing. And I tried to get my mom to go after the money, and she goes, I don't want his money. I said, well, give it to your grandkids. I said, don't let him do this. But interestingly enough, his second wife and her kids were part of our family. My mom treated all of her kids just great, and her and the second wife got along eventually. And in the second wife's second husband we got along with, the second wife's third husband we got along with, and so it was just weird dynamics in the family. But my dad was just a crazy maker. He took advantage of people. He told his kids they should be like me. I'm like, you want them to be gay? Okay. I don't know what your game is, but I was at their house, and my brother was arguing with him in the back room, and they were doing it on paper. My dad's writing down, and my brother would read out loud what he said. And I was sitting in the living room just looking at his wife like, this is priceless. And he finally said, well, you should be more like your brother Ricky. And I was like, oh, no. And we'd had this conversation before, and I just got out, walked back there and said, listen, you don't even know me. You didn't raise me. You weren't around me. You don't know who I am. Quit trying to bring me into your arguments, because you don't know me. You can't tell people they should be like me because you don't know who I am. Just stop that. We've talked about this before. You didn't have anything to do with my upbringing. Mom did. So I worked for him once, and we had that conversation because he was an electrician. He was good, but he also cheated people a lot, which kind of, I'm a good Christian and I cheat people. Okay. But we were up in some site, and the contractor said, me and my next oldest brother were working for him. He said, you have good kids. And my dad didn't know I was outside on the other side of the truck. And he goes, yeah, I raised some good boys. And I was like, no, you didn't. And I just kind of had enough because he hadn't paid us for like a month. And I just walked around the truck and said, you didn't raise me. My mom raised me. Anything good about me is from my mom. And I quit. And I left. So, yeah. And my brother said the contractor thought it was hysterical that because I was probably 16. I stood up to him and just said, no. You don't get to use me in any way. So that was interesting. It was kind of a racist, and everything else is just. And I get it. His mom, I quit visiting my grandmother because she couldn't quit saying the N-word, and I was just like, didn't really hold it against her because of her age, but it also just grated on me so much that I didn't want to be around it. So I was just like, okay, we're gonna leave early and just go on home. But Both my brothers were in the military. That was interesting. I thought about it, and they both told me no. So I guess, somehow they love me. Is the noise okay on the microphone?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Okay. It just popped up and said my noise is making noise. So I was going to wear headsets, but
No, it's okay, and I can always get that fixed later on after the recording.
clean it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I went to 3 different elementary schools in Tulsa. It was odd. I was a latchkey kid before we even knew what that was. I used to walk myself to school. My mom went to work. I'd walk home. I'd either go is equal distance. She worked at a laundromat, or I could go home and I had a key. I'd let myself in. And people think that's, I laugh at people now because everybody's just so paranoid about their children. I'm not going, the world's not as dangerous as you think it is. It's just that you hear about it more. Back when I was a kid, you didn't hear anything outside of your town, and really not much outside of your neighborhood, unless you're watching the local news. But you didn't hear about a bus crash in India or a kid being kidnapped. My brother took it so hard in the 80s, he wouldn't let his kids outside unless he was outside. And I was like going, that kidnappers are usually related. I said, I don't want to kidnap your kids. I borrow them and give them back when they're unruly. So I think you're safe. Of course, we did have Dad in the mix, so maybe not. Yeah, he was an interesting guy. He had a choice to go in the military or go to jail. No, back then, you're limited choices. My other brother wanted to be in the military, joined in 1970, was in for 27 years, never saw combat until Gulf War. And then he said, okay, I'm going to retire. Good plan. My other brother, who didn't have a choice, went in 71, went straight to Vietnam, was on the helicopters that evacuated Saigon, the helicopter lift when they took people off the buildings and stuff. So I thought, wow, you're really lucky, but it kind of really messed with his head. Didn't realize how much until I took him to see Apocalypse Now, and I thought we were going to die on the way home. Oh, that was a red light. Okay, it's okay. But he did. He's good. They're both good. We don't talk a whole lot because one of them is very religious and used to post a lot of anti-gay stuff, and I'd have to go on Facebook and go, so you think your brother is a horrible person and should die? He goes, no, I didn't mean you. I said, well, but you didn't put a disclaimer on that post. Now, did you? You didn't say gay people are horrible people, except for my brother, whom I love and cherish. You didn't do that. So we had big arguments about that. And I think the last big talk we had about it, he said something, but he goes, I love you, but. And I said, see, there it is, the but. I said, there are no exceptions to love. You either do or you don't. And I said, I love you and you irritate me. And so to keep my love solid, I don't communicate with you that much unless it's just necessary. And I was talking about I'm kind of going all over the place, aren't I? It's how it comes in my brain. I was talking about my dad's third husband. Her second husband died. We really liked him. That's when I discovered SpongeBob SquarePants, because the kids were watching that at the house when we were getting ready to go to the funeral. And I went in and sat with my brother. And he goes, have you seen this before? I said, no. And he goes, it's interesting. I said, I really like it because I love cartoons. And so that was funny. She married again, and she just recently died, and I went down for the funeral. And it was interesting to see everybody. I get kind of like, you don't come down that often. I said, yeah, well, I don't want to drive 4 hours to have a fight and just turn around and drive home. So I just don't. And then, I get the argument, well, you're brothers and you should just set it aside and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like going, yeah, you just don't understand. I've compromised my whole life about things, and I'm not willing to do that anymore. I'm not going to be the better person when I'm not in the wrong. I said, I'm not going to just shut my mouth and not do that. I said, I'm not going to do it. I said, when I told them I was gay, they all said, we all knew. And then it was like, well, you just haven't found the right woman. And I was like, really? I said, you haven't found the right man. I mean, same argument. just don't be stupid. So that was, that was weird. I, it's kind of a wild child, drinking and smoking and drugs and all that whatnot. But I never had an issue, which my brother thought was interesting. He said, "You never had a problem?" I said, "No." I said, I get addiction. I understand how it happens. I said, but when I was doing things that people question, I said, I was doing them just to see what they were like. And I didn't do them to hide a hurt or fill a need, redirect pain or anything like that. I said, I just did them because I wanted to see what they were like. And I said, I think that makes a big difference. I said, you have to be careful that you're not doing something because it masks something else. I said, I don't even like to take pain pills unless it's absolutely necessary, because I always go, pain in your body is your body saying, hey, this over here hurts and you probably need to do something about it or favor it for a little bit. It's like, okay, I can deal with that. Unless it's that, weird stub your toe throbby pain, and then that's a whole other issue. That's the stupid pain that you're like, okay. Bought my first house at 29 in a transitional neighborhood. That was great. I think I paid $16,000 for it. I guess it was 1989. Really cool neighborhood. I think they call it this anymore. It's Brady Heights in Tulsa, but Brady is a racist, so I don't think they call it Brady Heights. They probably call it the Heights or something. But we got a historic overlay when I was there. Really, the name we managed. It was a great neighborhood. It was, there was mixed race, and there were Black people who'd been there for a long time, and Hispanics and gay people, and just really cool mix of interesting houses. The historic overlay was because there were so many different types of houses in one neighborhood. Everything from Victorian to Prairie Modern and Foursquare and Craftsman, and so it was a really fun mixed neighborhood. And like anything else, once we kind of got rid of the drug dealers and arsonists and prostitutes, everybody just turned on everybody else, which was par for the course. But we started having home tours, and it really worked out well. Even when it was still questionable, we started having home tours, and people actually came up and just forgot that there were such great homes, so close to downtown and stuff. But Brady apparently was not liked by the wealthy people in Tulsa when he built that direction, so everybody else went the other direction. So there's this little interesting enclave right north of downtown, and then all the rich homes are to the south. So yeah, it's funny. I mean, the stories are funny, but and it was an interesting neighborhood. I got a Weimaraner like the first year I lived there. I got a loan to redo the outside of the house because it was a slumlord. Basically, he took all the trim work off the house, covered it in pressed particle board, that weird, looks like you took up shavings and pressed it into boards. He covered the whole outside of the house with that, didn't paint it, and then cut smaller holes around over the windows and put like mobile home aluminum windows in it. So it was just god awful ugly on the outside. And so I redid the outside, got an award for best improved house, and I thought, yay, look at me. It was a really fun neighborhood, and it was one of those, and I think this happens at least in the lower part of the country where, in Tulsa, it was, north of the railroad tracks was bad. You don't go there. And we couldn't get contractors to come work on our houses because we lived in North Tulsa. And so we all managed to figure out how to do stuff ourselves. I mean, if you'd seen my woodworking stuff from junior high school, you'd think, don't give that man a saw, because you're whatever that is, it's not going to stay together. But, it was an amazing neighborhood. We had a guy, him and his pregnant wife, the gay couple I met that convinced me to move up there had owned a house further down the street, and then they bought one of the bigger houses in the neighborhood and redid it. And just funny, weird things. But he had brought somebody that he met at work to look at a house where two old ladies had lived for years in the upstairs hallway because the rest of the house had collapsed into the basement. And it was a solid brick house. And him and his pregnant wife looked at this house and they were just like, "You're kidding, right?" And it was like $5,000 for this mammoth 2-story solid brick home with a garage apartment. And then they bought it and they got the garage done so they could live in the apartment. And she finally, because she was so pregnant, had to go live with her parents because, you know, but he redid the whole house, except he couldn't get anybody to come put a roof on it. And so we were all at Tim and Howard's house drinking and eating burgers one night. And I said, we all just said, "Listen, get the materials. We all have the tools and we'll just come put the roof, we'll put it on." So we helped frame out the roof. And then I think he finally got somebody to come do the rest of it for him. And then of course, the minute they got it done and made it totally livable, not that long after he got transferred. So they sold it, but they made lots of money because they didn't have that much invested in it. But that's the kind of neighborhood we have. The Miss Gladys behind me, somebody burned her garage. We had an arson problem for a long time. And she was all upset because they weren't going to give her much money. And we just said, "Miss Gladys, get the money they're going to give you. We'll buy the materials and we'll build your garage." And so we rebuilt her garage. And it was the best time. It was just so much fun. She was a sweet lady, had been a housekeeper for a wealthy family, and they kind of took care of her. And so she made us food, lunch, and made the bread, made everything. And she was just tickled that everybody showed up to build her garage. And I thought, your family. You're just, I still have a punch bowl from when she passed. I bought a punch bowl and stuff so I'd have something from her. Interesting neighborhood. We had a St. Joseph's house in our neighborhood. You're probably maybe too young for that. They were the AIDS kind of hospice houses. Very interesting house in the neighborhood. It had you entered through the front door into almost an atrium, and then the house was built around the atrium. So nice building for that. Sad, because people who came there didn't leave until they died. So, but it was nice that we had something like that, to take care of people. The arson thing was a problem. My dog became used to going out on the front porch for sirens just to make sure it wasn't next door or somebody I knew and needed to run over there. And years later, when the neighborhood was much better, I think there was a lunar eclipse one night and I went for a walk with the dog, ended up down by the fire department near Owen Park. And we were walking by and one of the firemen goes, "I know where you live." And I laughed. I said, "I bet you do. My dog loves you guys," or at least that's my interpretation. I said, "She demands to go out when she hears fire trucks." I said, "Not ambulances, not police cars, fire trucks." And he said, "Yeah, we see her." He said, "We all look for her because, you let her out and she leans and watches us go by." I said, "Yep." And then she stretches, goes and pees, or comes right back in. She doesn't howl at you or anything. I said, "I trained her to do that, I suppose." So that was kind of fun. That was fun. We used, it was a Weimaraner. I don't know if you're familiar with Weimaraners. They're kind of big silver gray hunting dogs with yellow eyes. And back then, except for, was a photographer, Wegman, I think was his last name, used them. And so they were becoming popular, but most people had never seen one. And so we used her to confront drug dealers and people in the neighborhood because she was really scary looking, except she was like the sweetest, most non-threatening animal on the planet. Little kids would come over our yard and just tackle her, and she would just lay there on the ground with the little kids all over and hurt them by accident because she was large. But for the most part, she was just, okay. All these people are yelling at each other. Why aren't we walking? Saying, "We will. Play your part, dog." And then I moved up here because a friend started a business and wanted me to come up and manage multiple locations when they started expanding. So I moved here in 98. They sold the business. Oh, wait, I moved, 98. They sold the business 2008. And I knew I wasn't going to be employed by the new company. And everybody was like, "Oh, sure, they're going to keep you." And I said, "No." I said, no, you get rid of people who make big salaries because, And so then I kind of just took off for that summer. My mom died. I knew I was losing my job. My mom knew she was losing my job. She'd been in the hospital since Thanksgiving with cancer and passed, I don't remember, February? She passed in February 2008, and then the job ended in April. So she was really worried about that, and I had to convince her everything would be okay. And so I took most of that summer off, and then I got a job at the University of Kansas. And I'm still there, surprisingly enough. And so that leads to education. High school, barely made it by the skin of my teeth. Managed to get an English honors, which I thought was really funny. I don't know. I like to say I'm smart enough that I was bored, but I was also, going through all my crisis about being gay and just feeling like I was a chunky kid. And it just, yeah. So the minute I got a car, I skipped school a lot. So I'm surprised I actually graduated. But in 11th grade, I was talking to my English teacher and I said, so I need you to sign something for me. And she goes, what's that? I said, I want to be in English honors. And she just looked at me for a minute. And she goes, yeah, okay. She goes, you're going to have to do the work. I said, yeah, that's fine. But I said, that's kind of what I want to do. If I'd gone to college, I probably would have leaned toward English and literature because it was my thing. I used to read all those books and go, wow, this is good. My best friend from like second grade came home. We had a house together for a while, not gay. And I came home. He came home one day and I was reading The Great Gatsby and he goes, why are you reading that? And I said, it's fascinating. He goes, it's so boring. I said, no, it's fascinating. I said, you're taking it out of context. I said, in 1920, oh, this was scandalous. Wow. And he goes, you're weird. And I said, yeah, thanks. It's like, I'm sorry. I'm weird. I don't care. Did some junior college in Tulsa. I think back then it was called TJC, Tulsa Junior College, I think. Took algebra because the minute I didn't have to take math in high school, I quit taking math. And then I paid for it and got my high school teacher, which was sort of appropriate, I suppose. He was really funny. I think his name was Mr. Moutre. He said, you could have done this for free. And I said, yeah, but I wouldn't have learned it back then because I just didn't care. And I said, sometimes the education should be later in life instead of when you're a teenager and have a lot of weirdness going on in your life. But I did good. I didn't take any more math after that, except there's an online Khan Academy, I think. I used to dabble in Khan Academy once in a while and do some math stuff. And so it was interesting because I got my job at KU. I was the first person in that department without a degree, and I'm an accountant. It's like, how did that happen? But when the business that was a payday loan company back, in 98, and Kansas had really strict laws, lower fees than what's nationally average now. So there are like 40 payday loan companies in the whole state until the ones in Missouri decided to come over and they convinced the legislature to change all the rates and stuff. And they went from 40 to 400 in like a year. So, yeah. But so I did all the, obviously I had to do math there. I did all the bookkeeping and payroll and all that good stuff. So I had enough background skill. And in Tulsa, I had lots of jobs. I worked at I don't think you guys had them anywhere else. There was a convenience store in Oklahoma called U-Totem. UTOTEM. Very, would be very scandalous now because of, But I worked in Jinx, Oklahoma, which was, I lived at 56 in Peoria and the store was at 91st in Peoria, but it wasn't a direct route. You had to go all the way around to you had to go 4 miles this way and then over to 91st Street. And I rode my bicycle back and forth to work until I made enough money to buy a car. Interesting job. It was the only gas station open on the weekend, and open 24 hours a day. So it was really exciting place to work. So I did that until I had a good car. And then I went to work for a restaurant called Molly Murphy's House of fine repute. There were two. There was one in Oklahoma City, one in Tulsa. Really fun restaurant. Everybody wore costumes. All the booths were different, like buttons or boats or just all kinds of weird stuff. They had a salad bar made out of a car. And like I said, we all wore costumes. I was too young to work in the building. So I was the doorman because I was under 21. And so I was the Mad Hatter. And my job was to entertain the crowd that would gather to come in the building. We'd have a line that'd go around the building. And to entertain the crowd, I would be rude, which was great. Being the Mad Hatter was the best because I could insult people and they thought it was funny. Like, oh, you got dressed up. Or, is this your other wife? Because there was a guy that came all the time with different women. And so, yeah, I actually drove through his sunroof once. He pulled up in front to let her out, and they just ran and jumped and went through the top of the car. And just looked at him and said, "You have a hole in your car." He loved it. He just thought it was the best thing. Had a great time there. I moved from Tulsa south to a farm community named Bixby. I was south of Bixby in this little house. And we moved in this house, and in the closet in the bedroom, there were, I wish I could have met this person, but there were alligator shoes that had heels on them this high, platform shoes. I don't know if you remember what platform shoes were. Think of Elton John and Pinball Wizard. And so I wore those as the Mad Hatter. And to my boss one goes, "How'd you stand in those all day?" I said, "Well, they're not, platform shoes aren't high heels." I said, they're just raised, so they feel like normal shoes. He said, "Yeah, but you climb the front of the building." I said, "Okay, well, yes, that's probably not normal." But to entertain the people, once I got a big enough line, I would serve champagne to the people in the line, and I didn't care how old you were. And then in the winter, we served hot buttered rum. So breaking the law in Oklahoma, just right and left. My other job was to watch for alcohol, ABC, the Oklahoma version of alcohol, whatever it's called, tobacco, fire, I don't know. But their cars were so obvious because it would be some, off green or beige, no hubcaps with tons of antennas all over it. And you just go, "Oh." And I go in and go, "Hey, they're here." But it was a fun place. I worked there for a while. Winter was coming on. I knew I wasn't going to stay because I didn't want to work outdoors all that time. And so I ended up at a parking company. So I worked outdoors anyway and shoveled snow and whatnot. Worked for them for a long time. I went to work for the post office and did that for a while and transferred to California, lived in LA, hated Southern California. It's a great place to visit, but 3 hours in your car to go back and forth to work, and everything is the same color of light brown, and too many people. Came back here. Came back to Oklahoma. Gay life, man. I dated older guys, which was probably a mistake because people my age are damaged. So people older than me were probably even more damaged. So that made relationships a little difficult. The only one I had I thought was going to work didn't, because he was just super jealous. If I even looked at somebody, he would just, "Do you know them? Have you slept with them? Would you sleep with them?" It's like, so that came to a head on, I guess like 2 years in or something. I had my high school reunion, and he was trying to say I needed to be home by 10:30. I'm like, "Okay, you're older than me, but you're not my mother. And these are people I've known since like second grade and junior high school. And I'm going to go visit them, and I'm going to stay out as late as they want to stay out because I haven't seen them and they're coming into town." And so when I finally got home about 3 a.m, all my stuff was outside. And so I just called a friend who had a truck and loaded it up and left. And then I got stalked for 3 years because he'd call and want to talk and meet. And it's like, no, I said, we've had this conversation so many times. I said, jealousy is a deal ender. I said, it's ugly. And it's a trust issue. You don't trust me. I said, I can't fix that. That's a you thing. And I'm done playing that game. But yeah, oh God. For years, I'd get phone calls in the morning. "Hey, just calling to see how you are. Would love to go have dinner with you. And it doesn't mean anything." I'm like, "Well, it does mean anything when you say it doesn't mean anything. You're just, yeah." And so gay community in Tulsa was pretty tight knit. I mean, there was a lot of gay people in Tulsa, so I didn't know everybody, but they used to, somebody would bring volleyball net down to Riverside Park in Tulsa, 21st Street. There's a parking lot, restrooms, and we'd set up volleyball court. And sometimes it was 8 people, sometimes it was 60. Who knows? And we'd just all play. There'd be 20 people on a team, and we'd play volleyball and listen to music and just have a great time. And I think I was riding a motorcycle back then, which was really funny to me now. But pulled in and was talking to some people, waiting for the guy with the net and stuff to show up, and I wasn't facing the street. And there was a this tall black ballet dancer named Rodney. He looked up and then he put his hand on my shoulder and he goes, "Now, honey, you got to be nice." And he said, "What's happening?" He goes, "I think he's here." And I said, "No." I said, "He's not, is he?" He goes, "Yeah." And so I turned around and he pulls in. We had gone to San Francisco the year before in February. We rented a car the second day so we could go over the bridge and then to Muir Woods and all that stuff. And like I said, I think I was 24. Wayne was 38, maybe. So we, ran around the first night. We walked the next day. Even though it was rainy, I told people, it's rainy fog in San Francisco. It's perfect. So we loaded up the car the next day. We went to the Castro district. He wouldn't hold my hand. And I'm like, "You're not going to hold my hand on the gayest place. It's like Disneyland for gays." I said, "Okay." So we were driving across the bridge. I said, "I wouldn't mind having," it was a 5.0 Mustang, white on white convertible. I said, "I wouldn't mind having one of these." And so he shows up in a 5.0 Mustang convertible, white on white, stick shift. Wayne was a town car guy. So he killed it in the street. He killed it in the parking lot. He had a little twink with him. And I just walked to the car and I said, "You're embarrassing yourself a whole lot." I said, "You can't even drive the car. You bought it because I said I wanted one. You don't like these cars. You're a town car person. Stick to your road." And I said, "You're embarrassing yourself." And I looked at the twink and I said, "You need to run, dear." And I said, "Quit calling me. Don't show up anymore. I don't know how to tell you that nothing's ever going to happen, but you just need to quit." And he did. He quit bothering me after that, but he also killed it backing out. And Rodney goes, he said, "That was pretty nice." And I said, "Well, you told me once that my barbs landed too hard sometimes." And I said, "So I tried to be nice." I said, "What I really wanted to do was grab him and shake him, but I didn't do that." "Stop bothering me." But yeah, I mean, the same guy who wouldn't hold my hand in Castro laid out matching outfits for us in Eureka Springs. And I said, "No." I said, "Okay, one, unless it's Halloween, we're never wearing matching outfits. Okay?" And we're not going to do it in Arkansas, even though Eureka Springs is also the gayest place on earth. But so yeah, he was an interesting person. We decided we were moving to San Francisco. I found us an apartment, and he came home from work one day and said, "We need a garage." And I said, "We're not taking your town car to San Francisco." So you remember how hard it was to drive the Mustang on the hills in San Francisco? You can imagine a 22-foot square. And then he came home one day because I found one. He was adamant. I found one. And he came home one day and he goes, "We need 2 bedrooms." And I went, "Why?" "Well, what if my parents come to visit?" I said, "They can stay at a hotel." He goes, "We'll need our own rooms." I said, "Wayne, you're 38. You live with a 24-year-old. You're going to move to San Francisco, the gayest place on earth. They know." He goes, "Well," I said, "Have they been to your house?" "They know, because you're not a grandmother and your house looks like your grandmother decorated it. So they know." And then we had just bought an antique set of crystalware, beautiful Victorian grapes etched on all the crystal. And we were sitting there talking about moving, and he goes, "I guess we can leave all the crystalware with my mom." And I said, "Why?" "Well, they have earthquakes." I said, "We have tornadoes." "Well," I said, "Listen, we're not moving anything we're not going to use, and we're not storing anything we're not going to use. If we're not taking it, we're selling it or gifting it to somebody." I said, "But we're not going to do that. That's crazy. Don't buy things you don't use. I said, I get it. It's pretty, but what's the point of having it if you're not going to use it? It doesn't make sense to me. Maybe it's because I was a poor boy. I never had those things. I never had those nonsense things, or as I call them, dustables. I'm very adamant about not having things I have to dust all the time. So, but yeah, life's been good. The '80s sucked. Lost a lot of people to AIDS, but I also know people who were diagnosed before they called it AIDS. I think it was called GRID at first, who are still alive. So, I mean, I had a person in our family talk to me and said they got diagnosed, but they didn't want to take the pills and stuff. And I'm like going, it's not the same. I said, back then it was poison. I said, but the poison's what you needed to try and stay alive. I said, no, it's not that anymore. I said, take your meds. Don't do weird stuff. Just take your meds. But yeah, I mean, it was horrible. I quit going to bars. I quit going out really in the 90s. I didn't really have a gay life in the 90s, but because it was just, kind of what was the point? And I saw most of my friends at funerals. So it was not good. And, and I had a friend that moved from Norman, Oklahoma to Dallas. And his friends would come visit. He moved to Pittsburgh. I helped him move to Pittsburgh, which was fun. And they would come visit. And then some of those people died. And, just a lot of the core people that I ran around with in Tulsa passed at some point. It was awful. And it was also very surreal. I remember going to a church in Tulsa it was Christmas. And it was all decorated for Christmas. And the sweet little lady at the thing was going, oh, we're all decorated from Christmas and blah, 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 blah. And I just want to go, honey, I'm here for a dead person. Like, I don't care that you're decorated for Christmas. Years ago, there was a friend. I met this guy through a friend of mine's husband. And then I met his brothers. And his one brother, we got along great. And he called me one day. He goes, hey, you want to go to Pocho, Oklahoma with me? And I said, why? He goes, I'm going to go buy a Corvair so I can put the motor in my Volkswagen bus. And I said, yeah, okay. He said, can we use at that time I had this behemoth 70-something Buick Electric 22. The doors are bigger than most cars now. So we put a bumper trailer hitch you used to be able to get at U-Haul when we had real bumpers on our cars. Drove to Pocho, got to this farm, scary as hell. It was outside of Pocho, and it was like the house is sort of leaning, no paint. There's all kinds of weird handmade weed cutting instruments all over the yard, with big motors and whatnot, and cars just scattered down through the farm. And there's goats on everything. They're standing on top of the house. They're on top of the buildings, the cars. And so we go in, and this lady answers the door, and she lets us in. And she's kind of short and hefty and redhead. And we go in their house, and like the floor is worn down to the wood underneath the carpet and whatnot. And we get in the living room, and they have the biggest TV I've ever seen at that time. It was huge, and TVs were huge back then when they were huge. I mean, they were, colossally. You'd take a forklift, and they had all these VHS tapes. And it dawned on us that we knew her from the movie VHS, the Weird Al Yankovic movie back in the day. And it turns out her and her husband had been in North and South and VHS and some other movie. We're just like, what's happening? And it was really funny. And so we go down in this field to get the car with my big giant Buick. And the goats are like just standing on top of cars looking at us. I'm like going, I don't like this. It's like, this is like The Hills Have Eyes and Chainsaw Massacre and everything. I said, can we just hurry up and get your car and leave? So that was fun too, because he put that motor into his Volkswagen bus, and then we'd go zipping around town, and people would follow us off the highway to figure out how his Volkswagen bus would go so fast. I said, yeah, leave it to the Germans to make a vehicle that can barely go up a hill, their ambulance. I said, makes no sense, but okay. So that was fun. It was interesting moving up here. The people I'm house sitting for, so I belong to, this is something I encourage gay people when I'm on Facebook on gays over 40, gays over 60. and just in general, I'll hear people talking about, I don't want to go to the bars, but how do I meet gay people? And blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, how do you meet people? I said, join a book club. Do you like wine? Join a wine tasting club. Do you like riding a bike? Join a bicycle club. Do you like running? Join a running club. Do things that you like, and eventually you'll find people that like the same thing you do. And if they're not interested, if they're not gay, you'll at least have friends. And if they are gay, then maybe that'll lead to something else. I said, and plus, once you meet some gay people, you're going to meet other gay people because, the circle, blah, blah, blah. And so when I was up here, when I lost my job, I was going to lose my house. So I moved in with my boss, who I'd known since I was 14, moved into her house on the 3rd floor for a while. And moving into the house, 3 flights of stairs, made my legs pretty good. So I started running again. It takes weird reasons. And so I on Meetup, I think I found a running group, and I've been with them for years now. And it's called, the local one is Larryville Hash House Harriers. And I always encourage gay people to listen, if you drink and you just silliness and whatnot, I said, this is it. So it's like, we call ourselves a running group with a drinking problem. And though I don't really drink that much anymore, but so we started a bar, we drink a little bit, 2 or 3 people go out and lay a trail. We leave the bar 15 minutes later, try to follow the trail. And we sing really bad rugby, naughty rugby songs and other songs. And sometimes we wear costumes. We wear tutus if the trail number is divisible by 22. It's just crazy, and it's a lot of fun. And then I tell people, I said, one, I haven't been to one yet that's not just people friendly. You're gay, great. Trans, whatever. You're purple, you're whatever. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about that. As long as you're gonna have a good time. That's all anybody really cares about. And they're all over the world. It started in 1938 in Guadalupe, and it just spread. And so it's a blast. We just had, the reason I had to cancel on you, we just had our red dress run, which is a hashing charity event now that spread from San Diego and is now all over the world. Can you hear the cat?
Yes. That's great.
Julius. Yeah. And the other 2, there's 2 cats sitting at the top of the stairs, just looking down at the stairs like, what? What's wrong with you? I'm alone. Sometimes I think he forgets I'm here. So I'll walk over to the top of the stairs, look down, and I'll go, what are you doing? And then he's a talker anyway. So he'll go and run back up the stairs. It's like, you're so funny. You're such a funny cat. But the red dress run was a blast. And, I'd scheduled that Sunday with you just thinking, yes, red dress is Saturday. Well, we usually run on Thursdays. We move Thursday to Friday when it's red dress. So we have an event for people coming into town for it on Friday night. And then we have our Saturday day event. And then this house has a pool. And so we've been having Sunday fun days out here for the summer. And so I was like, okay, well, I did not think of this through because I'm going to be kind of all over the place for the weekend. But I'm glad you were patient and decided to let me
Of course.
chat. But yeah, that's the big takeaway. It's like, the internet really kind of killed the subculture of gay life, going to bars and all that stuff. And that's either good or bad because obviously a lot of people have problems with drinking and whatnot. So you just have to be more, it's kind of like you have to be a normal person and do what normal people do and go do things that you enjoy and find other people who enjoy those things. There's another group in town. If I ever finish getting my bike electrified, I'm putting a motor on it. Because where I live in town, anywhere I go, and you would think Kansas is not flat, contrary to popular belief. Anywhere I go to come back is uphill. I'm 65. Riding a bicycle uphill is not something I look forward to. So I finally got an electric thing for it. I just need a couple of more things to get it to work right. But so there's a beer bike Wednesday. Same idea. They ride their bike somewhere and have drinks and go to visit farms or whatever. But yeah, there's always ways to meet people that don't entail going to a gay bar. And the other funny thing about Lawrence, Kansas is there are no gay bars. And I get that question a lot when people are coming to visit. It's like, so where are the gay bars? There isn't any gay bars because you can go anywhere in this town and nobody really cares that you're gay. I said, there's a few bars that are probably predominantly more gay than others, but they're not exclusively gay. I said, but years ago, I hate to think how many years ago now, my niece came up, my brother and his wife, and my niece and her husband and their young daughter came up to visit, and we were walking downtown, and my niece started elbowing me, and she goes, I said, what? She goes, those guys up there are holding hands. I said, yeah, nobody cares in this town. She goes, that's what I was going to say. Nobody's even reacting. I said, yeah. I said, Lawrence is pretty interesting. We just they don't care. And I said, my running group, we've been part of the Pride Parade now that they started having a parade again. And I said, it's the turnout's always great. I mean, back in the day, the Fred Phelps people, the Westboro Baptist Church, I hate fag people would show up with their signs and whatnot. And we'd be walking down one side of the street and everybody'd be cheering, and they'd be on the other side of the street and everybody'd be booing them, which was really funny. And I think the year they quit coming, I think they walked with us all the way down to the park. And I went across the street and I thanked them for coming, which I think kind of took them. I said, wow, I really just thank you guys for coming. I said, we had a fundraiser for every hour you were here. People donated money. I said, so we made lots of money. Thank you for coming. And I think somebody slit their tires that year, which I don't approve of, but they quit coming after that. It's like, yeah, coming to Lawrence to be hateful is sort of stupid because nobody's on your side here. So it's just like, go on. And this year, our Pride Parade was, it was really big, and it rained that morning. It didn't rain for the setup. The minute we started marching, it started to sprinkle, and then it had to be 2 inches in less than an hour. It rained so freaking hard. And the funny part of it was everybody stayed in the parade. All the spectators stayed. They just got up against the buildings under the awnings and stuff. So they were like, yay! And we'd have to run over to the sidewalk to give them things. And we just, somebody goes, wow, you're enjoying the water. I said, yes, I am. I was like jumping up and down in the puddles. And and then I was walking. When I march, I usually carry a flag. And this year I carried 2 flags on a really tall pole. And it was all I could do to keep it upright in the wind and stuff. And so when I go back, I can't walk in the street and I can't walk on the sidewalk because the flagpole is too tall. So I go down the alley, and one of the photographers was coming down the alley, and he said, I felt bad for you guys. I said, I said, it was a lot of fun. People stayed anyway. And I said, the rain stopped when we got to the park. And so they still got to have all their events and stuff. And I said, I'm usually this wet from the heat. So being wet from the rain's no big difference. Feels a little better. But that was fun. And then Lawrence is also, we do one of the running stores here does a run every August 21st in remembrance of the Quantrill Raid. And so they have a 5K at 5:05 a.m. on the 21st, which is when the Quantrill Raid started. So we won't be caught sleeping again. And so I started doing that before COVID, and I always wore a kilt and carried some sort of rainbow flag, whether it's, Love Wins or Don't Tread on Me or whatever. And so I showed up this year with the double pole, and I was standing there, and the guy goes, can I get your picture? I said, yeah. And so I'm standing in the street, 4 or 5 in the morning, getting my picture taken, holding my flags and my kilt. And he goes, he said, man, I'm always glad to see you. I said, yeah, I know. You always get me in the pictures. I can usually find myself somewhere. And I said, I wish you guys would quit saying you're glad to see me so I could just not come. Because getting up at 4 a.m. sucks. And then running, I don't know if you've been to Lawrence, but we run down Mass, and then we go up Mount Oread, which is where the university is. So we go up that stupid steep hill, and then we run back down through the back and back through the neighborhoods. But going up that hill is just is really awful. And years that I think I'm not going to do it. I think last year was a younger couple who we talked before the thing, and they caught up with me at the top of the hill because I only walk up the hill, and they were running by, or I think we were pretty close to the end, and they came running up, and she goes, we weren't going to do it. The hill really made us mad, and we weren't going to finish. But then I remembered that you were doing it with a flagpole, and I thought, if that guy can do it. I said, you can say old guy. If that old guy can do it, we should be able to do it too. I said, yeah, I'm glad my age is an inspiration to you. I said, it inspires me. I didn't think I'd get this old. And I said, now my goal is to stay old and crotchety as long as possible. So make people suffer. It's the old crotchety gay man. Current times are really kind of awful, and people think I should be more upset about it than I am. But I mean, the 60s and 70s and 80s weren't good to gay people. Ronald Reagan never even said the word AIDS, and I think Nancy did finally. But as far as they cared, they could all die and nobody cared, which is what was happening. They drained swimming pools and all kinds of stuff. And my mom even asked, because my mom worked at a laundromat for years and years and years, and she goes, "Do I need to worry about it?" I said, "No." I said, it doesn't. It's not like some diseases that are really robust outside of the human body. I said, it doesn't live outside of the human body very well, so you don't have to worry about it. But yeah, it's just the times are awful, and hopefully we'll bounce back like we have in, every so many decades. America goes through, the Roaring '20s, and then Prohibition, and then we had wars, and then the '50s, and then the '60s came around and changed everything again. And I think, it swings back and forth, and unfortunately, it's kind of gone really crazy to the right this time. But I think people are sort of getting sick of it. And that's interesting too. I have friends who moved all over the country, and people go, "I can't believe you're still in like Oklahoma and Kansas." I said, "Listen, you can't change something if you're not there to change it." And I said, same argument I gave in Tulsa. We went to a gay play, early '80s, I think. P.S. Your cat is dead or something, and it was a horrible play with horrible actors who were obviously sleeping with the horrible director. And we went to the after party, and someone goes, "Well, we had a pretty good turnout. I wish we would have had more people, more people outside the gay communities." Well, you can't get people out of the gay community if you don't advertise except in gay bars and newspapers. Well, I don't know if Tulsa's ready for it. I said, "Listen, they can't be ready for it if they don't know you're there." I said, you have to let people know you're here. That's what the pride parades are about. That's what being out's about. I said, yeah, I'm even moving to Lawrence. Somebody tried to burn my house at one time. I didn't know that until probably months after they did it. And I just happened to notice the burn marks on the side of the house where they were idiots, tried to light asbestos siding on fire. Straight people. Smart. But I said, there was some Kansas legislature that wanted to make camps for all people with AIDS and put them on it. And it's like, I said, and just like what's happening in Oklahoma, they want to build shrines to Charlie Kirk. I'm like going, yeah, people propose stupid shit all the time. It doesn't mean it gets passed. Oklahoma, maybe. They've kind of gone crazy lately, but things will change. If they not, then we get to become crazy rebel terrorist people. All the generations after mine can live out their Star Wars fantasies. But I think we'll be fine. It's just a shift. And, people are shocked I stayed in Kansas, and I'm like going, Kansas isn't as conservative as you think and the way you think it is. I said, Kansas is very much sort of libertarian. You leave me alone and I'll leave you alone, and we just live our lives, and if we're not interfering with each other, that's great. I said, now they tend to fall towards stupid ideas because they vote for things, more libertarian, more conservative type things without really considering the social implications of other things that are being, proposed. I said, but this time it's sort of landed back at their feet, as it were, and a lot of people who have supported certain ideas have realized that there are consequences to supporting that. So we'll see. I mean, who knows what's going to happen? I don't want anybody to get assassinated, and I don't want anybody to be shot. But I mean, rhetoric leads to craziness, and people are crazy. And if you push the right buttons, you're going to get somebody crazy. The small dog that I just watched is a shadow dog. You know, it's like, what are you doing? I'm going with you. I'm going to try to trip you, not on purpose, but I'm going with you. And when I first met that dog, he's a rescue dog, and he was like, he looked at me like I was Jason Voorhees and I had a knife. And I was like, dude, I'm not going to hurt you. I'm like the best dog person in the world. I had a friend once say, if reincarnation's real, I want to come back as your dog. And I went, oh, that's a really nice thing to say. She goes, yeah, but she goes, I've known you most of my life, and every dog you've ever had, you just let them be dogs. I said, you know, yeah, they'll sit and shake hands or something, but you don't expect them to be not dogs. And I said, the joy of a dog is when a dog's having joy. I want them to run crazy with their tongue lagging out the side of their head. So that's what makes them dogs. That's what makes them so joyful. But yeah, Juno is, you know what a New Yorker dog is?
I do not know.
New York. So New Yorker cartoons, they used to have draw dogs, and they would look like a potato with a point on the front of it for their nose. And Juno looks like a New Yorker dog, and he has big bulgy eyes, so he looks very suspicious about all things at all times. And so the first time I watched him, I thought, oh my God, what are we going to do? Because I can't take him for walks or anything because he's freaked out by me. And she goes, when you go into the guest bedroom, he's going to join you in the bed because all my dogs love that bedroom. I said, well, that bed is super nice. And she goes, yeah, it is. And sure enough, I got in bed and he comes running in there, drops himself in the bed, looks at me. I'm like, hi. And he wants to play. And I'm like going, yeah, no, we're going to bed. I've been trying to play with you all day. And it was funny this time. Every time I woke up in the morning, there were dog toys all over the bed from both dogs. It's like, you guys are nuts. We're going to bed. Bring toys. No, go to sleep.
That's funny.
They're fun. I mean, animals are great. I had a Yorkie for a long time that somebody bought and thought it was for their kids, and their kids are too young to play with it. So they kept it outdoors. And a friend of a friend goes, hey, do you want a Yorkie? I said, yeah, that's my mom was living with me, and we just lost our other dog. So I thought, I'm going to get my mom a Yorkie. Nope. He didn't like her. He liked her, but he didn't want to be held by anybody except me. And so there were issues. My mom was just like so mad at him. And then when we moved to a different house and he started peeing on the stove. And my mom goes, why is he peeing on the stove? I said, well, it's the name on his paperwork because he's a real Yorkie. I said, is a lady. So I'm assuming it's an old lady. And so he's thinking you're the old lady. And so he's proving things to you, Mom. He's marking his territory. But yeah, he was a stud from the breeders. And when I told somebody I was going to have him fixed, they said, don't you want to breed him? I said, no, that's all he's done for his first year and a half of life. I said, he's done. And I took him to my vet, and she goes, I didn't picture you the Yorkie. I said, I know. That's something odd to say to a gay man, but I get it. I said, because I've never had a small dog. I said, but he's cute. And she lifted him up, and he still had his little conads, and they weren't little. She goes, oh my God. I said, I know. I said, they're bigger than my friend's dogs. And he's a hunting dog. And she goes, oh my God. She goes, are you going to let me take those? I said, yeah, I will. And then I felt guilty about it for a long time because without those, he looked bow-legged. And I was like, oh, he's a bow-legged dog. But he still had it in him because the house beside me had a husky, a female husky. The dogs behind me were females. The dogs this side were females. And so he spent all his time walking along the fence, strutting. He'd puff up and do little leg kicks. Like, hey, ladies. I'm like, you don't have balls. You can't. You can't do anything. One, you need a ladder. And two, you have no equipment anymore. But he was a lot of fun. He didn't bark for like the first 2 years. I always thought he was horribly traumatized. And he started huffing at the kids next door on a trampoline one day. Oh, he's gonna bark. And then the rest of his life, he barked at me all the time because he would throw things like food or something under the couch and come look, find me and just bark at me, go to the couch, look at it, bark at me. It's like, yeah, you have a bowl of that right over there, but you want that piece. But yeah, he was a lot of fun. He was an interesting dog. We took him to. We did a road trip to California. It was the last road trip I took with my mom. I got a new car and I said, "Do you want to go? Do you want to fly to for Christmas this year to see my oldest brother, or do you want to drive?" And she goes, "Could we take the car?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "You got a new car. Let's take the car." I said, the way we're gonna do it is we're just gonna drive until 5 o'clock and we're gonna stop. I'm not doing the whole let's drive until we're dead thing because I don't want to do that. So I had a Honda Fit the first year they were here, and I didn't realize at the time, but they were coming through Houston and coming into the States that way and spreading out. And so the further I got away from the middle part of the country, people would follow us off the highway because they wanted to know what it was. And then when they looked inside of it, they would freak out because I don't know if you've ever been in a Honda Fit, but the back seat folds almost flat to the floor. So it's like a tiny minivan. And so I'd pull in like to the hotel and start unloading and people would just come over and go, "Are you kidding?" And I had like 76 presents, luggage, an artist easel, my dog, my mom. And yeah, it was insane. And people just go, "Are you kidding me?" I said, "No, I said, this car is fantastic." So that was a great trip. I mean, we had a blast, and hotels didn't charge us. And then I would come down the elevator and walk out with my dog. I didn't never put him on a leash. I just carried it. And he'd walk over to the door and wait for me and then go out and he'd come back, walk over to the elevator. And then say, "We love your dog so much." I said, "Can we hold him?" I said, "Nope, he won't let you." I said, "You can try." I said, "He's not going to bite you or anything, but he'll just struggle until you put him down." She goes, "That's rude." I said, "I know. I keep trying to convince him he'd get a lot more out of life if he'd just let people hold him." But it was a blast. We went, I told somebody, said he marked everything between here and California. And then we went to the beach. He didn't care about the dogs on the beach. It was, I'm going to go pee on that seaweed mound and I'm going to pee on this and I'm going to pee over here. And then we went over the Boulder Dam because neither of us had been there. And then we went we spent the night in Williams, Arizona. And so the sun was out. It was a little windy. And the whole place was snow. There was snow in the canyon. And way off in the distance, it was snowing. And it was backlit. The sun was shining on it so you could see it. And it was just like, this is great. And I said, we didn't see any wildlife except a crow that was trying to intimidate my Yorkie. And my Yorkie was having none of it. He was like, "I'm peeing. Leave me alone." So that was fun. That was a great trip. And then, that was 2006. And then she passed in 2008. So we didn't get to go anywhere after that. Other than that, that's my life. I mean, I've almost got, I don't know how long I've been, 2008, August. So I know I'm going to be there for 20 years, but I plan on working until I'm 70, just because, like I said, I'm old and I've gone through 2 cycles where I lost my first retirement because of the stock market crash way back when, and then I lost the other one in 2008 when the stock market went down. So basically started over. And so now I'm like going, okay, I have the government retirement, so I should have that one in place. So I'm trying to get to 70 so I'll get my full Social Security. And also I don't like to say I like working, but I also can't imagine not working. I just can't imagine just sitting at home doing. I mean, I wouldn't do nothing. I'd probably go ride my bike or go kayaking. I like kayaking. So I would find things to do, go to art museums, or just I threatened my boss once to get a van and live in my van and just drive around the country. And she goes, "You can do that," because we work remotely most of the time. She said, "But you have to call Rhonda and see what states you can work in, because some states we don't want to pay the taxes in." I said, "Fair enough, I can do that." It's like, if you go to California, you have to pay taxes. If you work in California one day, you have to pay California taxes.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it's a nightmare. I'm glad I don't do that part of payroll because it would make me crazy.
Right.
I do. How do I explain it? Let's see. I do international non-resident alien tax compliance for our international employees. We were laughing about the dogs. They just had their kitchen redone, and Maya's sort of Juno taught Maya how to bark, and Maya brought Juno out of his crazy shell where he's a little more friendly now. And so there were two guys working on the kitchen. One guy loved dogs, one guy did not. Maya hated the guy that loved dogs and loved the guy that hated dogs. I said, Maya is a cat. Because cats know if you don't like them, they come sit on you. And they do it sweetly. Hi, I'm going to come sit on you. You're allergic? Oh, that's so sad. Let me rub on your face. It's like, thank you. And that was a good. Well, I didn't tell you the story. So the running group, during COVID, we quit doing public events. And then we did stagger start runs where you would show up with your household, anybody in your household, and you would start the run. And then 15 minutes later, somebody else would come and do it because, we're following trails. So as long as nobody put marks down, you could go solve the trail yourself and do stuff. And so the guy that owns this house, my friend Don, he met us at Free State Brewery one night when we were running. We explained what we were doing. He loved it. We told him about our public page. Well, we quit posting that after that because COVID happened. And so we didn't post for a year. And then when we finally could start posting again, he showed up the first time we posted on the public page. And he shows up. And we're always happy to see a new person. It's like, yay. And when he left, we were all like, I don't think he's going to come back. I don't know. I don't know if he really enjoyed it or not. And so our next run was, we have themes. I don't know do you know Old Greg? You ever heard that one? That's a very popular one. We have a Rocky Horror Picture Show theme. We just did the Oregon Trail, which is an old video game. And so the next trail was single-celled organisms. And Don shows up in a blue wig and an amoeba costume with a flagellum. I said, oh God, he is one of us. Holy crap. It's like, welcome to your family. So we were talking about stuff, and he grew up in Owasso and I grew up in Tulsa, and we were talking about some stuff and realized that we knew the same people. We never met each other, but we knew the same people, went to the same places. And I was talking about, I was at a bar in Tulsa and I worked night shift. And so it was my day off. And I rode my motorcycle to the bar. I was the only person in the bar with the bartender. We were chatting and blah, blah, blah. And I was going to leave because a storm was coming and I didn't wear a helmet. So I didn't want to try to drive in a rainstorm and I didn't want to get on a wet bike later. And he goes, oh man, don't leave. I'll be alone for a long time. And I said, yeah, I just don't want to get wet. And I don't want to ride home on a wet motorcycle if it goes through. He goes, well, just bring it in the bar. I said, okay. And so I rode my motorcycle into the bar, parked it by the pool table, went up, sat at the bar. The bar fills up. And I would occasionally yell at people not to get on the bike because they'd be over by it. And I'm like, I don't want it to fall and kill somebody. And Don goes, wait a second. Where was that bar? And I told him, he goes, we were there. He says, because we came in and thought, well, who would park their motorcycle in a bar? I did. And he goes, and you would yell at people to get off of it. I said, yeah, because I didn't want them to kill themselves. I said, because it weighs a lot. And he goes, and then you rode it out of the bar. I said, I did, because it's easier to ride it than it is to push it. He goes, I thought you were crazy. I said, you love me. And then I had a really bad wreck in 90, I think in either late 89 or 1990. Well, he worked for the police dispatch and he got the phone calls for the wreck because I was talking about it. And he goes, where was that? I said, like Denver and Archer. He goes, I took that phone call. He said, I bet you took a lot of phone calls because a lot of people called. He goes, oh yeah. I said, I had to call my boss and said, listen, I'm not going to be at work for the rest of the week because I was in a really bad car wreck. And he goes, Denver and Archer? And I go, yeah. He goes, there's a helicopter filming it right now. And I said, oh. Hey. So it was, yeah, I got T-boned by a taxi cab, and I was in a 69, what would be a Suburban now, but it was a panel truck. It had a wood floor in the back. And it hit it so hard it threw it 69 feet down the road before it landed. And then it slid. I fell in the window, road rashed all the skin off my back. And then it flipped in the air and I fell out in the street. I was fine except for the road rash, but it was crazy. It was a crazy wreck. And the Salvation Army used to be across the street, and they all they came running. It was a really super loud crash, apparently. And so it was like, okay, everybody knows. But so he said, yeah, he said, I was working that. I took all the calls. And then we talked about my neighborhood, the transitioning neighborhood, and some of the officers that worked up there. And he knew those guys. He knew people, an older gay couple up on Reservoir Hill in Tulsa. And we were talking about them one day. He goes, oh, I've been there. So we know too many of the same people. It's just sort of weird that we've never run into each other, but that's, life in the big city.
Right.
And now we're buds, and we drive his husband crazy because we start talking about Tulsa and stuff. And he's like, oh, because he's not from Tulsa. It's like, you guys just talk about Tulsa too much. It's like, yeah, I know. So we actually took a trip. His I think he was on guard duty or something. He's in the guard. And so we went to Tulsa for the weekend and had a blast. It was a lot of fun. Got some of his friends hammered, drinking in the art district in Tulsa. But yeah, so that was, Don's interesting. He's an interesting character.